Well, welcome everybody to our March 2020 webinar, where today's topic is responding to floods. My name is Andrea Webster. I'm the implementation manager here at the Environmental Resilience Institute. Before we get started, I want to let you know that everyone on the call is muted. We ask that you save your questions until the end, but if you have an urgent or clarifying question during the presentations, I encourage you to send that question via chat. And Janet and I will monitor those questions and see if there's anything urgent that needs to be asked of our presenters immediately. Otherwise, as I said, we'll save the questions till the end. We will be live tweeting the webinar from @prepared4change, the Environmental Resilience Institute's Twitter account. So I encourage you to go online and retweet as you desire. And finally, I'm very pleased to introduce the director of the Environmental Resilience Institute, Janet McCabe, who will be our moderator today.
Well, hi everybody. And I don't know if your day has been like mine, but my day has been mostly spent canceling things. So that's the way it is right now, but I'm confident that we will get through this and life will get back to normal. We are ahead of the curve by doing these webinars. This is always how we've done them. So I think everybody's going to get a lot more familiar with this kind of technology, which probably is not a bad thing because it opens up the ability for people to participate in events. So we're thrilled to have you here. We're excited by today's topic. There's nothing like flooding to get people interested, especially in Indiana in the spring, but also in other places in the spring. So today we're very happy to have Jason Kauffman, who is the stormwater coordinator in the City of Goshen, Indiana, and he's going to talk about what they learned from their huge 500-year flood in 2018, which you may have seen photographs of. We also are lucky to have Manuela Johnson from the Indiana Department of Homeland Security with us today, and she'll discuss what you need to do and be ready for before, during, and after a flood to make sure that your community gets the resources it needs to respond and is ready for it. Flooding and extreme weather is, of course, one of the key results of climate change that we're experiencing here in the Midwest, and I know many people around the country and indeed the globe are as well. So let me start by just saying a word or two about the Institute. We are a creation of Indiana University's Prepared for Environmental Change Grand Challenge. We are an institute on campus at IU that serves as a hub for interdisciplinary research on climate change, especially as it affects Indiana and the Midwest. On a whole range of issues, ranging from atmospheric modeling to hydrology to infectious diseases. Infectious diseases of no interest to anybody these days. Food supply. We have people from the social sciences and humanities, all focused on the incredible challenge of climate change. We also have a significant effort at the Institute of working with local governments. Andrea and I in particular have been working with local governments here for 2.5 years now, almost 3, developing a number of different resources and tools, one of which is this webinar series, but a couple of other ones which are on the slide here that I would direct you to if you're not familiar with them, to see if they're useful to you. The one on the bottom, it includes just tons of resources for local communities in the Midwest about climate change and resilience, and also a lot of case studies. That's one of the things that we spend a lot of time on, is developing case studies of things that your peer communities have done that have been successful. We want you not to have to reinvent any wheels. We also have a very popular externship program where we place externs with recipients, local governments, and other organizations to help with sustainability and resilience projects in the summertime. And our latest product, something called the Hoosier Resilience Index, which I won't take time to talk about today, but there's information on the website, and we're very excited about having that tool available for Indiana communities in particular. We have a couple of upcoming webinars to tell you about. In April, our usual one, they're usually on the second Wednesday of the month, is on extreme heat. So we'll see you here for that one, I hope. And then kind of a special webinar on April 6th is on a new a set of a data tool that one of our researchers at IU has recently published called Future Water. It's really incredible. It contains just a huge amount of projected information using a whole slew of climate models, 2050, 2080, high and medium projections on 7 different parameters relating to water, water in the soil, evapotranspiration, stream flow at a very fine scale in the Wabash River Basin. It's really remarkable. So we invite you to come. The chief researcher, Dr. Chen Zhu, will be leading that webinar. And then we will schedule others in the spring and summer and let you know about those. So let's go to the next slide. We are recording today's webinar, forgot to say, and so that will be available via link. It's very easy to find. I want to thank the Association of Indiana Counties, Accelerate Indiana Municipalities, as well as the Indiana Public Health Association and Health by Design for their support of this webinar series, and they're really great partners to have. And if you'd like any more information about those organizations, please Google them. We have many people on the phone today for the webinar. I was amazed to see people from outside of Indiana, not amazed, but thrilled to see people from outside Indiana. Please spread the word if you find these useful. We're really happy to have you. So I'm going to go right now and introduce both of our speakers at once, and then Jason will hand it off to Manuela when he's done. So Jason has been working in the stormwater field in his boots there and his vest for 13.5 years. He's been the coordinator at the City of Goshen for the last 6 years. He manages the day-to-day MS4 program for the City of Goshen. That includes reviewing and inspecting erosion and sediment control plans, inspecting and helping to eliminate illicit discharges, providing public education to kids and adults, and working with municipal employees to prevent stormwater pollution. Since the historic flood of February 2018, he's been working with other city employees to prepare Goshen for future flood events and to make Goshen more resilient. And in fact, we're very, very proud of Goshen. It's the first city in Indiana to create a Department of Resilience. Mayor Stutzman at Goshen is way ahead of the curve in terms of focusing on resilience issues for his community. Our second speaker will be Manuela Johnson. She works at the Indiana Department of Homeland Security, as I mentioned, in the Response and Recovery Division. She's the administrator of the State Disaster Relief Fund. She's worked and volunteered in public safety and emergency management for nearly 40 years. Graduated from Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis with bachelor's degrees in chemistry and biology, and holds several firefighting and EMS certifications. Both of these folks are extremely well qualified for our topic today. So with that, I will turn it over to Jason.
Thank you, Andrea and Janet, for that introduction. And like she said, I've been the stormwater coordinator for 6 years for the City of Goshen, and I live and breathe stormwater. And 2 years ago, the flood that we had impacted us. It was a historic event, and the last time that we had the previous worst flood was in 1982, so 38 years ago. And what I want to do today is talk to you guys about 3 different times during a flood event, before, during, and after. And so to talk about the elements of the flood event, I want to ask some questions.
So, Jason, we can't see your slides yet.
You can't see my slides.
There we go.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Hit share and it didn't share, so. All right. So as I was saying, want to talk to you guys about the different stages of a flood event, but there are some questions that help you to understand or to think about what's going to be causing a flood event in your community. And that first question is how much rain is forecasted to fall on your community and in the areas upstream? Because not only is the rain that falls on your community a problem, but it is also the rain that falls in the watershed upstream of you. Because it takes a while for that water to reach the river and to flow downstream. And so as soon as the rain stops, that doesn't mean that the flood stops. How much water is held in the existing snowpack? Well, so 2 years ago, we had 15 inches of snow on the ground, which held about 1.5 inches of water. And then you add that on top of the 5 to 6 inches of rain that fell on our community, that ended up making the flood even worse. So it's important to know if you have snow on the ground, how much water is contained there, because it's going to melt fairly quickly. So then a set of three questions here that deal with the soil itself. Is the ground frozen or hard due to drought? How dry or wet has it been, and will water soak into the soil? If the ground is frozen, it's not going to soak in very well. If the ground is saturated, it's not going to soak in very well. And so those are things to consider, different conditions that could create a flood event. And then what is the current water level in the river? Is there several feet for the river to rise before it will leave the banks, or is it right there at flood stage and just a little bit of rain is going to make it overflow? That's something to consider. And then also, is storm infrastructure blocked by snow, ice, or debris? This is a great way to communicate. This is a great place for communication with the public. You can be talking to business owners and to homeowners and saying, hey, if you have a storm drain in front of your property, try to clear away any ice, snow, or debris that's blocking it, because if they're blocked, that's going to cause some additional flooding that could have been prevented. And then some resources to help you prepare for a flood event. These are resources that I look at not always daily, but at least weekly, and they're resources that are very helpful. Purdue University has a website called State of Indiana Waters, where they link you to several different pages of excellent information from the USGS, from NOAA, and from the National Drought Mitigation Center. All information that is very helpful to anybody who's preparing or who's thinking about potential floods for their community. The Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network, it's a volunteer organization that's spread throughout the country and into Canada and some other areas. And it's something that volunteers they monitor the precipitation that falls in their area every day, and they report it at around 7 a.m. every morning. I'm a volunteer, and the information that I can see is very helpful, because precipitation varies, sometimes just over half a mile or a mile. And so that's information that's very helpful. And I encourage anybody to check this out. And if you want to volunteer, it's a great way to be involved with citizen science. USGS current water data for Indiana, river gauges. This is something that's very helpful in knowing what water level, what the level in the river is that flows through your community. If you have a river that flows through your community, stream gauges and river gauges are very helpful. The USGS flood inundation mapper. This is something that we wish that we would have known about 2 years ago when the flood hit, because it was a study that was done by the USGS, and it showed what areas of the city would be impacted as the water rose at foot by foot level. And it was very accurate. And there are several communities throughout Indiana that have had these studies done. So if you're not aware of it, check it out. If your community has one, it's going to be a big benefit for you when a flood event comes. The Indiana Floodplain Information Portal. It's another website that's really helpful, because it has some additional floodplain information that FEMA may not have. It looks at some additional tributaries that might be helpful in understanding what areas might flood during a rain event. So during the flood event, when it starts, it's going to be the outlying areas that are going to be impacted first. The picture here that you see on the left, February 20th, this is Kircher Road. It's on the southeast side of Goshen, and the ditch that runs next to it overflowed its banks and inundated the road, excuse me. And vehicles were driving through it at bumper deep water, and there were cars stalling out. And this was on the southeast side of Goshen. It took 28 hours for that water to eventually crest at the Elkhart River, at the river gauge on Indiana Avenue, which is towards the middle of the city at 12.53 feet. It took a long time for that water to get through, and then it took even longer for the water to recede. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But once the flood event begins, the most important thing that you can be doing is having as many people, cameras, drones, as many eyes out in the field as you can, because that's going to help you document and collect information that's important. One, it will help decision makers and emergency personnel to respond quickly and to make informed decisions, but it also will be helpful during your post-flood analysis, during when you're looking and preparing for the next flood event. And then also communication and coordination. That is extremely important, because you're not only are you communicating with your own staff, but you're also communicating with the public, with other agencies in local government, state government, and federal government, and also nonprofits. So crystal clear communication can't be stressed enough. You want to have a designated command center. We had a command center at City Hall where people were meeting every day to discuss the changing conditions and what needed to be done, where resources needed to go, and what needed to be done to help those that were being affected. It helps to respond as necessary to rapidly changing conditions, like the placement of sand and sandbags. We had sand and sandbags at our street department, but we realized that we needed to have it closer to where the impacts were taking place. And so we were able to put a pile of sands in a shopping center parking lot right next to where the flood was taking place, so people could access that easier. Road closures, evacuations and water rescues, all things that are taking place during a flood event, but having a place to discuss this and to figure out what needs to be done is very important. You also want to document the extent of the floodwaters by looking at when an area is touched by floodwaters, when it's inundated, and then when the waters recede. This is something that's very important and very helpful to creating a kind of a timeline of the flood event. That will help you know what areas are going to be impacted when a future event comes, and you correlate that to the water level on the stream gauge or the river gauge that's in your community. So some surprises that we had during the event. Impacts along smaller streams and ditches. That caught us off guard a little bit. There were some new drainage paths that emerged. The picture here that you're seeing is what happened to the pedestrian path around one of Goshen's popular parks, Fiddler Ponds. The water overtopped the bank of the ditch, and it flowed through several detention basins at a residential community, through a meadow, and then ripped through the pedestrian path. And it happened again last year, and so now we have created some fixes to hopefully keep this from happening again. But that was a new drainage path that we were not expecting. Old drainage paths that may have been developed over time, those reemerged and created flooding issues. The impact of stormwater backing up through the sewer systems, not only storm but also sanitary. When the water can't get to the river, it's going to go somewhere, and so it collects on the surface, and that happened in several areas and caused additional impacts. Road closures. When we went home on the night of February 20th, there was one road closed, Chicago Avenue, which is next to Rogers Park. We know that road's going to flood every once in a while, but by the morning, there are 5 east-west roads that go through Goshen. Of those 5, 3 of them were covered in water. We were losing access to get across the river, and it actually ended up closing schools for the next 2 days. We had never expected that schools would close due to flooding, but that was the case 2 years ago. Just the amount of water. Again, the last time that we had a flood event like this was 38 years ago, or 36 years ago at that time, but 1982. And we weren't ready for the amount of water that came and where it went. So if you're able to think about where that water is going to go, again, that USGS mapper is a great resource for that. And I encourage people to look at that. And then just the amount of trash and debris that was picked up by the floodwaters. Dumpsters that floated, and some of them went into the main river and others got deposited, like the one you see here in this picture. There are some trash cans by the utility pole. Those came from a gas station over 1,000 feet away. So just the amount of debris that was picked up and then deposited somewhere else. And then the number of personnel hours that was required for a strong response. The main flood event, when the waters were rising before they crested and started to recede, lasted about 97 hours, which is just over 4 days. Some personnel worked 91 of those 97 hours. So the number of hours that went into responding to the flood event kind of caught us by surprise. Some people wish they would have slept a little bit more before the event started, but you can't be ready for that. So there's hundreds of hours that went into the response. The number of issues that continued to pop up that we needed to communicate to those being affected. We have a communication coordinator here at the city, and she was working overtime trying to make sure that information was being sent out to people as quickly as possible. We were sending information out through social media, to the newspapers, and to the news, any way that we could get information out. And then the typical preparations that we would do for any flood event, we realized that turned out to be inadequate, and sometimes it was actually a waste of time, and we could have done more if we would have realized the extent that the event was going to be. After the flood event, so as the water started to recede, we realized that the roads that had been covered or the bridges that had water up against them, the bridge decks, they needed to be inspected. And the picture you see on the lower right from February 22nd, that's Plymouth Avenue, that's on the southwest side of Goshen. It was impacted to the point where it needed to be repaired along the shoulder before it could be reopened. And so you can still see the stone that they placed there 2 years ago. You can still see it there today. And then March 1st, about just over a week later, as the waters receded out of the parks in the floodplain areas, we realized that we had a lot of sand to deal with that had to be removed. So those were things that you need to consider is how you're going to recover. But during the time after the flood and the water started to recede, time is of the essence. You need to complete post-flood analysis as soon as possible. This information that's collected is very important for the floodplain manager as they are preparing reports and documenting the impacts so that they can issue permits for reconstruction, for demolition, and cleanup. And it was a bit of a surprise, but not really a surprise, because people, as soon as the waters receded, they were in their buildings, in their homes, cleaning up, which makes sense. I mean, you want to get the damaged materials out as quickly as possible so you don't have any secondary impacts. But that they're going to be in there. So communicating with people, saying if you have damage, take pictures yourself, try to document what the impacts were so that the city can use that for our reports. And then additional rainfall. As soon as it rains, any high water marks that are out there on buildings or equipment or on the ground are going to get washed away. And that's going to make reporting or documenting the overall impacts that much more difficult. So getting out there and documenting the impacts is important. And that's where getting volunteers to help. People are going to step up and want to help during these events to recover. So then coordination for those volunteers. You're going to want to have the supplies that are needed, personal protective equipment, inspection supplies. Those are things that you want to have on hand that you can offer to people so that they stay safe and so that they are able to help you complete the inspections. ArcGIS solutions for emergency management. We use paper reports. We are looking currently into what kind of resources we could use from ArcGIS to make it so that it's more of a digital. So we're collecting the information which would streamline the process and allow us to map things better. We did map the impacts on GIS, and that was very helpful in helping us to show what had happened to city employees, but also to the public. Photography is important, documenting the impacts, but you have to remember that you're going into people's homes, and so you want to be aware of that and try to keep in mind that and not interrupt their privacy. So that's just something to keep in mind that we had to make sure people understood. Road and bridge inspections, making sure that bridges that may have experienced scouring or debris collecting up against the bridges, that's removed and that the bridges and roads are in good shape. Trash and debris cleanup. Again, it was a surprise. And as people were cleaning up their buildings and their homes, they were bringing out the damaged materials, the drywall, the carpet. And so how to dispose of that correctly so that secondary impacts weren't caused. So we had to decide, where do we put dumpsters? Where do we put dump trucks and trailers so that people can can dispose of their materials easily. And then waiting for the water to recede. Sometimes the water would collect in those spots and it couldn't get to the river. So then you're waiting for it to evaporate, or you're waiting for the ground to be able to infiltrate the water. And that was a bit of a surprise because of how long it took. And then the impacts of high groundwater on structures not impacted by the flood itself. When we started getting reports of carpet cleaning companies out in subdivisions that were far away from the floodwaters, we realized that groundwater levels were pretty high. And so that was a surprise to us. Something else to look for high groundwater is hoses that are coming out of the side of homes or out of the basement windows and discharging water onto the ground. That would be an indication of high groundwater too. When you have the time, you want to take all that data that you've collected, all those pictures, all those videos, and analyze it. You want to create a timeline of events by cross-referencing the date and time of those pictures and videos to the date and time on the stream gauge and the river gauge. This is something that was very helpful to us because we now know that Chicago Avenue, when the water levels in the Elkhart River at the river gauge reach a level of 8.43 feet, that there's water at the edge of Chicago Avenue. But then at 8.62 feet, we know that Chicago Avenue is completely covered in water. So we can start preparing ahead of time when we need to close the road, when we need to keep people from using that road so that we're safe. And timeline is very important for throughout your community and throughout your watershed. Another way you can take this information that you've collected is to create a hydrograph. Use the data that the stream gauge collected and create a hydrograph that will show the event. You can see the wave of water of flood water as it moved through your community and as it receded. It's a great visual that I find a lot of help in. You can see here about a month's worth of time that before the flood event and then afterwards. It took a while. The waters rose quickly, but then it took a while for them to recede. And in fact, we had enough rain a week later that it put us back up into a flood event. And then there's just a few additional surprises after the flood event. Insurance coverage. Insurance is always a tricky thing, and some people are covered, some people aren't, and sometimes it doesn't cover the damage. And so just understanding insurance is important. How much monetary damage it takes to receive federal help. If you know ahead of time what you would need to do, what your community would need to do to respond, how to document that, and what the damage level needs to be to get federal aid, that's going to help you have a better peace of mind. And then also a local assistance fund. We were able to set this up, the City of Goshen was, through numerous donations from the community, from businesses. And that was very helpful. And just figuring out how to distribute that money. We were able to work with a local nonprofit to get those funds to those that needed it most. So thank you for tuning in today and listening. If you have questions, I'd be more than happy to answer those. You can contact me by phone or email. And now I will give it over to Manuela.
Well, thank you, Jason. And it was interesting that some of your observations of this particular event are the same as my observations of that same event. And so it's always good that we have shared information. We're going to get started here. Can you see my first slide okay? Okay, I see Andrea's head nodding. So one of the big keys, our agency takes care of the flood events and works with the communities, both from an individual assistance as well as a public assistance perspective. And so we really look at all the aspects from the events. Another community, very similar situation, was Warsaw. Much of northern Indiana was impacted by that 2018 event, and in some cases in areas that traditionally don't get wet because of the extreme nature of the event. As Jason indicated, this was in many communities a 500-year event, And so it really was a challenge for many who weren't expecting the waters to rise in their particular neighborhoods and various parts of the community. The important thing from a effective recovery perspective is that we have to look at events both before, what can we do before the event occurs, and how can we prepare for future events, as well as documenting the event well. I must say that Goshen did a great job doing all their photography and documentation, and I think that helped them tremendously working through the assistance process. But also after the event, how you document what remains. And we'll touch on all of those here in a couple moments. Disaster assistance depends on the amount and type of damages that are sustained by a community and how those damages are documented. Whether it's from a state level fund or a federal program, we have to make sure that we properly document the event. One way to do that, whether it's digitally or physically, is to assemble a disaster documentation notebook. And this notebook can be assembled beforehand because so much of the information that you're going to need when you are documenting the event and the costs to repair and recover from the event are items that you already have available in your community right now, such as personnel rosters and hourly rates for your staff members, as well as benefit costs. The federal level does include, for infrastructure repair, public assistance programs, the benefits that the community pays to the employees, because that is a cost of making that repair if those employees are the ones doing the repair work. So having this information already in a file before a disaster event occurs allows the community to have less stress from having to gather this documentation. In addition, you want written policies for your time off, for your overtime policies, because the federal government, FEMA, looks at the work that you do and assumes that you would do it the same way whether you're getting federal funds or not. And so they look to your routine documentation to assure that this is your regular policy. Having an equipment inventory, because you are able under FEMA to recoup costs of equipment used for repairs, having that inventory ready in advance, knowing what equipment that you do have, is important again, because it makes that cost accounting process much easier during the event and after the event. As well as having copies of existing contracts that you may use. For instance, in Jason's case, they utilized some of their refuse disposal contracts to help with some of the debris removal and things of that sort. And so it's important to have those contracts handy. Again, this way you can show that it's already gone through the competitive contracting process and the limitations of those contracts, so that the reimbursement process can be hastened for your community. And for everybody that's listening, we've actually prepared an entire list of hints that Andrea will be able to share with everyone after the fact with her follow-up email, because there are a number of different items that you can include in that notebook and thereby be better prepared to address recovery needs for the future. The other thing that you want to think about in advance is the development of a flood response or resiliency plan. Typical flood response plans do just that. They talk about how we're going to respond, and that's it. A flood response and resiliency plan not only takes and identifies when it's going to flood, but also takes you into the concept of how can we make our communities more resilient. This is an example, some examples from some plans that have been developed here in Indiana. The map on the right shows the communities that have these plans already developed. We were able to use some funding from a 2008 supplemental flood grant, and were able to develop these resiliency plans so that the communities could better respond and plan for their flood events. The plans include things like identifying which roadways are going to go underwater and when, and allow the community to have a big picture perspective of how easy or how difficult it is going to be to maneuver throughout the community, as well as indicate which neighborhoods and infrastructure items are going to be impacted by varying flood events. The chart in the center actually is a listing of the major roads and when they're going to overtop. This chart is used heavily by the first responders in the communities that have the plans so that they know which routes are going to be available to them to not only respond to incidents, but also to get people to the hospital. Because in many cases, our infrastructure may not be underwater, but it may be isolated due to access issues. So the plans really address these issues, as well as helping a community identify areas of refuge and areas where the community may consider development in the future that are outside of the floodplain. An excellent example of that is the city of Tipton that has a river running right through the center of town and experienced a real nasty flood event in 2013. And they were able to, with their plan, identify areas where the community could grow. And when they were doing their post-flood acquisition program, where they might consider developing new neighborhoods for these community members and new community members to look at moving and not having to face the menace of the river. As Jason indicated, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And during the disaster event, seeing where the water was, how high it was, can show immensely the impact of the event, as well as begin the documentation of damages. It also is a good way to show your crews working and what they were doing, because after the event, you're going to have to document what your people were doing. And if you have photography showing them at work, doing repairs, doing the sandbagging, that is going to just verify that activity that was ongoing in the community. You also want to keep good records of the hours worked by personnel, as well as the work that they conducted. That is the only way that we can look at potential reimbursement for those funds. So when we're working during the event, we also want to start thinking, what options do we have when we do make repairs? it's not always best to go right back in and repair things just like they were the day before the event, because then the next time a similar event occurs, you're going to be in the same situation. So consider during the event not only what's going on, but how can we make repairs so that we don't face it again. Similar to Jason's sidewalk scenario. In 2018, they put it back probably the same way it was originally. In 2019, when it flooded the second time and took the sidewalk out, my guess is that they probably placed some nice drainage units in there to go under that sidewalk so that that sidewalk doesn't act as an impediment for the next flow-through event that occurs. As I said, don't rush the repairs after the event. Make sure you get all the permits and clearances, federal reimbursement, as well as state funds if you have emergency funds in your state, which we do in Indiana, are dependent upon the work being completed in compliance with all the permits and clearances. Remember that if a particular agency waives the permits, it does not mean that they're waiving the permits on behalf of all of the agencies. Rather, they are waiving the permitting for their agency alone. You still have to pursue permitting from the other agencies. That's something that is a common misunderstanding when the Department of Natural Resources waives some of the permits after a flood event. People think that they don't have to consult with the Army Corps of Engineers and IDEM, and if they're dealing with a historic structure, which is anything over 40 years old, or an environmental situation, that they don't need to get those clearances. And that is a mistake, and it can result in loss of funds. So you really want to make sure that you always get your permits and clearances taken care of. Also, get estimates, or if you're doing your own repair work, write up an estimate on what it would cost to bring the repair back to the day before the event. Document the actual damages that have occurred after the water is gone. And then if you think that you would like to upgrade to something more resilient, like larger drainage tiles, larger culverts, raising a roadway bed or something of that sort, make sure you document that cost above and beyond what it takes to get back to the state it was the day before. Because most grant programs will look at what's it cost to take it to the day before. There may be some mitigation funding available, but if that funding is available, it has to be executed through a scope of work that everybody has agreed upon. So you want to make sure that you are clearly documenting what it's going to take to get it back to the day before, and then what additional costs do you want. Federal assistance requires that insurance be maintained on all structures. And so you'll have to have proof of your insurance information. It does not assist when structures are not regularly maintained. So if our water lines aren't regularly maintained and we don't have records of that maintenance activity, the ability to get reimbursed for the repairs after a disaster will not be there. So for those of you who have street departments, who have your own utilities, make sure that you check and assure that they have their regular maintenance records and their maintenance schedules available, so that when you request assistance, that material is available to assure that you can have the greatest chance at gaining assistance. Federal funding is typically 75% of the eligible damage costs, and they only are there to return it to pre-disaster condition, the condition that it was the day before. And remember that assistance is not always guaranteed. Just because an event is major for your community does not necessarily mean that we've met the required thresholds to get assistance from the federal government or have the ability to open even some state level funding. So make sure that whatever the challenges are, that they are well documented. The key to getting in to get assistance is a good damage assessment and making sure that your county and state level emergency management folks are aware of the damages that you have found. And also, those damage assessments have to be timely. States only have 30 days to make a request of the federal government, and that means gathering all the information from all the communities, as well as writing up impact statements and completing the letter and getting it to FEMA. So you can see that the window for a damage assessment is very, very narrow. So we want to make sure that as rapidly as possible, we get a good assessment in, and we can always update it, but we need to have that initial knowledge of what has occurred so that we can best help the community address the situation and also make appropriate requests from other agencies as need be. Remember also that there are other agencies such as the Natural Resources Conservation Service who do rural infrastructure impacts, as well as the Department of Transportation that deals with on-system roads that have different thresholds also. So identifying what damages exist and where those damages are key to helping you gain assistance and be more resilient in getting that repair completed and looking for future ways to avoid future damages. If you have any questions regarding the Indiana State Disaster Relief Fund program or our federal programs, feel free to reach to me and I will be more than happy to get you to the appropriate folks. So, Andrea, it's all yours.
All right, well, thank you, Manuela, and thank you, Jason, for those fabulous presentations. I mean, this is all the information that I've been wanting to know, and I'm not even in charge of stormwater. So, so I can imagine what it's like for all of our guests. So at this point in time, we'll open it up to questions. So to ask a question, you can enter a question through the chat function, which you can access by hovering your mouse over the video screen, and you should see an icon pop up that says chat. And so type your question in there. You can also unmute yourself by clicking the microphone button and ask a question directly. So to get us started, I have one question, and both of you mentioned insurance as being a very key part of the flood response effort. So what are some specific tips you could offer to even individual homeowners or to local governments in terms of what they should know about insurance?
Well, one important factor, especially for homeowners, is that anyone can buy flood insurance. You do not have to live in the floodplain in order to buy flood insurance. But not all insurance companies sell flood insurance. And frequently that is expressed by the insurance agent as you're not eligible for flood insurance. That's not quite the correct answer. Everybody in the country is eligible for flood insurance. It is a question of which company and where you're located within the floodplain or not in the floodplain that dictates what level of insurance you'll need and what the cost for it would be.
Great.
Yeah, I don't have anything additional to add to that.
All right. Well, we do have one question that came in for you, Jason, from Jennifer. She asks, have you found any educational or outreach materials that you found helpful to educate the public around stormwater and the importance of stormwater ordinance and fees?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure about education materials for the importance of ordinances and fees, but there is a lot of good good educational materials out there. One that I know that I look to is Clear Choices Clean Water. It's an organization that started in Indiana. It's a national organization now, but they have a lot of great public education information. They kind of focus around pledges that people can make, and there's over 10 different pledges that people can make, but that is one of them. Deals with volunteering to protect storm drains. That's one that I push a lot to people to help keep storm drains clear. There's also other pledges on picking up after pets, or using or not using fertilizers, or using the correct fertilizers. So that's something that I would encourage people to look at, is Clear Choices Clean Water. If you want to get more in depth, I would be happy to talk to you more, but that would probably be the one that I see as being very helpful at this time.
All right, and we had one question come in from Manuela, which is, she says, Andrew says, I think I missed the post-disaster window duration for damage assessments, application for state and or federal aid. Can you touch on that again?
Sure. The county has to complete a damage assessment. We typically in Indiana encourage that damage assessment, the initial damage assessment, to occur within the first 72 hours after the event, with then state concurrence occurring typically within the first 14 days. And this way, if we have significant enough damages available, we can then get that information to FEMA and request the joint preliminary damage assessment with FEMA. And all of that has to occur with us generating a letter to FEMA requesting a disaster declaration within 30 days of the disaster event. So it is a very short window, as you can see.
Andrea, I have a question, if I can, since there's not another one in the chat box. This is Janet. Have either of you had experience with post-flood, let me say, opportunistic entrepreneurs who are trying to encourage people to have their houses tested for mold, or services that are perhaps taking advantage of people who are in a very difficult situation, having just been flooded?
I know that in the city
Jason,
in the city of Goshen, we caution people to make sure that we caution people to make sure that they were aware that potentially was going to happen, and that they looked closely at the companies before they entered any contracts. I know that we had that issue during the flood. We had a hailstorm this past year, and that was also a concern for the public. So I don't have any good examples, but I know that we did caution people about the potential for that to be happening.
The Indiana Attorney General's office, after events, frequently will post information about how to protect yourself from opportunistic salespeople. And one of the keys is not paying in advance for services. If somebody is coming to the door and you've not solicited their assistance, you may want to think twice about that, and don't ever pay in advance for repair services, because typically those are those opportunistic individuals who will take the money and run and not complete services. They may begin services, but in most cases they will not complete the services. So if you haven't summoned somebody to your property to give you an estimate, you may want to think twice if they just show up at your door and say, hey, I was in the neighborhood and I thought I'd ask you if you needed any help. Volunteer services typically are organized within the community. And so, again, if somebody comes to the door and they say, hey, I'm here to help you, you may want to double check with the community leadership and their volunteer coordinator to see if this individual that is quote unquote volunteering their time is legitimate or not. Because sometimes we have people who self-deploy who may be well-meaning but are not being tracked by anyone, and it's an opportunity to leave the door open to become a victim a second time. So we strongly encourage people to have their radars up and pay close attention when a disaster event occurs.
That's great advice. Thank you. Very practical.
And we have one more question come in. It says from Karen. She asks, how does the increased likelihood of flooding due to climate change impact how cities and FEMA respond? Will there be more of a focus on mitigation planning?
There is a big focus on mitigation planning at the local as well as at the state levels. And the county emergency management agencies are responsible for beginning those mitigation plans, but they occur with many people from the community providing input into those plans. So I would definitely get with my county emergency management agency with regards to the hazard mitigation planning efforts.
All right. Well, thank you so much to Jason and to Manuela for spending some time with us today and sharing the wealth of knowledge that you guys have that will be so helpful to communities in the future as they're responding to floods. Janet, do you want to add anything before we close out?
No, my thanks as well. I think this was incredibly hands-on, practical presentation, and I'm assuming, Andrea, that the slides are going to be available. In particular, I'm thinking of Jason's numerous links to incredibly useful websites to track stormwater and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we'll take those links and put them in a document so that everybody has access to those resources.
Okay. All right, so great. We'll see you next time. If you like this, please tweet or do something so people know about these events, because we're all about making information available. And everybody take care.
All right.